Welcome to the latest edition of Hammer Horror in Order here on the All American Spook Show YouTube channel. I'm Josh. I'm joined here with Donnie
Nope.
and the Professor Smoke.
What's up?
Um, the entire premise of what we do here on Hammer Horror in Order is literally right there in the title. We go through the Hammer Horror or the Hammer Films horror library, I should say, and we watch them in the order in which they were released. You know, starting all the way back with the Quatermass Experiment, back in episode 1 that we did a few months back. So we have now arrived at the fifth movie here in the release order, and that is the Abominable Snowman, aka the Abominable Snowman of the Himalayas, and it was released August 26, 1957. So this one is a lot different from what we've watched up to this point. Would you say that's a fair assessment, Smoke?
Yeah, it's different. Well, first of all, too, what we've watched up to this point has basically been four Quatermass movies or three Quatermass movies, rather, and Curse of Frankenstein. And this
one. technically two Quatermass movies, but remember, X Unknown is kind of like, you know, it basically is Quatermass. They just couldn't call it that. But yeah, so we'll say 2.5 Quatermass movies and the Frankenstein. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is different. It is different. It's Curse of Frankenstein is what it is. It's playing with classic monsters, you know. So you got totally different storyline and all that stuff. But comparing this to the Quatermass films, it's got some similarities in its fact that it's black and white. You know, I think like all the Quatermass movies up to this point, well, everything except Curse of Frankenstein has been black and white from Hammer at this point. What they had done Curse of Frankenstein in color, then they went back to do this one in black and white. But also, we can talk about that. I think this movie probably looked better that way, and maybe that's why they went with it that way, just because of the mountain, you know, the snows, the contrast in dark and light with the snow on the mountain versus being at night, the shadows and things of that nature. I think it really wouldn't have been as great in color the way this movie was shot. So yeah, I think I like it shot in black and white first of all.
And I feel that this movie, production value wise, was other than the Curse of Frankenstein, it's probably the best one we've seen yet. Production value, right?
Yeah, then and we talked about this off air. It's like, for me personally, it's the setting that this is in. It's in the mountains and snowy region and isolated. That's something that resonates with me, because like one of my favorite horror movies. Anybody who's been a fan of the Spook Show for a long time knows we did one of our first YouTube things. I think we did outside of our podcast was our favorite remakes. That was one of the early things I believe we did, or however many, 5 or whatever it was. Maybe it was 13. I forget exactly what the number was, but The Thing was in there for me, up there. Yeah, actually, The Thing is my favorite remake that's ever been done. So, and it has to do with that setting, same as the original Thing from Another World from the 50s, or any movie that's set in that sort of isolated. It doesn't necessarily have to be snowy conditions. I just like that sort of claustrophobic, icy, icy or non-icy, whatever. Like Alien, for instance, is another one. Settings that are just ratchet up the tension based on where it's, you know, the location and everything.
Now, they actually shot this movie in Pyrenees Mountains in France. That's where they actually shot it, but it's supposed to be like, I don't know, did they? Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, obviously in the title, right? So it's in the other title of the Himalayas. Yeah. But I thought that was kind of interesting. But like, I was watching, you know, when I was watching it, I was wondering like where they had shot it, because I mean, it didn't look like some studio drawing kind of crap. Like it looked, you know, it was authentic.
And even the studio, like some of the things that might be considered obvious studio sets, like when they're having close-ups and they have a lot of dialogue going on, you know, it's obviously not on some side of some mountain or whatever. It's set, but I thought maybe it's because of the black and white too. I think those two things cut together well. You know, like it didn't look stagey, even when you know they're obviously on a sound stage made up to look like part of the mountain or whatever. I thought that cut well together with the scene, actual, you know, mountain footage.
What did you think of the creature effects in this movie?
Well, like I said, I know we aren't giving away spoilers. Let's just say that I'm not going to give exact mentions of this or that, whatever, you know, what he looks like exactly or whatever. But let's just say that it takes a little while for the story to get to a point where you're going to see what the creature looks like to begin with, or even see bits and pieces of it. I mean, I think most classic movies did that, you know, and I think there's something to be said for that it's sometimes effective that way. We are, of course, used to and have been since probably going back to the 70s, maybe even, but certainly in the 80s and beyond and now, having everything coming at you all at once, so to speak. You want to see the creature off the top. You want to see the creature if it's a creature feature type movie all through the movie. But back in the 50s and this classic era, they would ratchet up that tension a little bit by alluding to it, and then you finally see it.
Frankly, to me, based on what we had seen in the Quatermass movies,
Mm-hmm.
where you didn't really see anything until the bitter end. Like
yeah, true.
you're in the last, you're in those movies, you're in like the last 5-10 minutes of the movie before you see anything.
Like the last reel of the movie, yeah.
Yeah. Surprising to me that you saw something as soon as you did, even though you were halfway through the movie. But I was like, oh, there it is. And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute, there's still like 40 minutes left in this movie. I was surprised by that.
That's true. That is true. If we are comparing it to Quatermass, definitely, and which is cool that we get to do it. I like that we're doing this chronology thing of starting from the beginning and then coming forward. So you get to see all these as they came about, as Hammer's productions values kind of go up. We'll see that continue to happen too. Script writing, and a lot of these script writers would be somewhat either the same or the same group, like writing 2 or 3 different movies for Hammer, or 4, 5, 6 different movies. So we'll see them all develop as they did on the timeline when they originally were released, which is cool. I like how they developed the reveals, so to speak, of the creature, where you get a little bit here, you get a little bit there, and the overall effect when you finally do see the creature, I thought it was effective for that time period for what it is, and this isn't giving anything away, obviously. But the Abominable Snowman is another name for the Yeti, which is like we talked about this off air. I mentioned it as basically being the alpine version of Bigfoot.
Donnie, did you have any notes that anything worth pointing out here?
Yeah, this was actually the very first Hammer film for Peter Cushing. Even though the Curse of Frankenstein was released first, this was the very first movie he ever did for Hammer.
Well, there we go. I guess, basically what we do here for Hammer Horror in Order is we kind of come together beforehand and we come up with a solid rating. So we'll give our thoughts or anything. So the rating that we came up for this one is we're going to give this just a straight 3 hammers. Myself, I think this isn't, so far from what we've watched, this isn't as good as The Curse of Frankenstein. But probably not many going forward are going to be quite that good. Let's be fair, so I think it's more fair to compare it to the 2.5 other, the 3 other Quatermass 2 movies and X the Unknown that we've watched. And I think compared to those, this is a better movie than those. Better production, just better everything. I think the acting's better, everything. And that's not the crap totally on those movies. They are what they are, but I think this is a better film. So
production value wise and everything, acting, script, everything is elevated, I think, from the Quatermass movies from X the Unknown. Even though we like those well enough, we gave them, we recommended those and gave them well enough rating. It is a totally different genre. I mean, those are atomic horror, sort of that Cold War, fear, sci-fi type movies that the Quatermass movies are playing on. And this, of course, being somewhat of a creature feature set in, like I said, in the Himalayas, isolated setting. And one other thing we didn't mention was the atmosphere of this movie is amazing. And even when it's not up in the Himalayas and dealing with the Yeti, when it's down in the village before they leave on the expedition, it's got like Tibetan monks that are there among the Tibetan monks, and there's a lot of the Tibetan monk chants going on in the village while they're getting ready to leave and do all that stuff. So that adds a lot to the effect of it, I think, and to the atmosphere of the movie and to the folklore of the Yeti being in the Himalayas and whatnot. So I thought that was cool.
And it ironically, it ends up being I know we're watching these chronologically, but it ends up being a perfect pull here for the month of February.
Yes.
In the dead of winter here in the United States that we're watching the Abominable Snowman. So overall, obviously, we give it 3 hammers out of 5. So we highly recommend it. If you like these older, Hammer flicks, but just older, like creature type movies, like Smoke said, I think you'll really enjoy this. So next time on Hammer Horror in Order, we move on to Horror of Dracula from 1958. So we're moving on to the following year. It came out in May of 1958. So Horror of Dracula, aka just Dracula. But I'd say most people would probably recognize it most as Horror of Dracula. So I'm really looking forward to that one. And we got a handful of pretty big Hammer flicks coming up. You're kind of starting to enter that prime time golden age of when Hammer Hammer films really started taking off. So I'm really looking forward to it. So for Will, who couldn't be with us, Donnie, Professor Smoke, I'm Josh. We are from the All American Spook Show, and we encourage you to go check out everything else here on the YouTube channel. And of course, every Monday at 6 p.m. East, new episodes of the All American Spook Show podcast come out. So we'll talk to you next month.